Hello friends, this is Sanjay. In this video, we'll be talking about socialization process, that is social world and children in the context of teacher, parents and peers, which is part of the Karnataka TET CDP syllabus for paper 1 and paper 2. As usual, in this series, we will be covering only those topics from each chapter which are important from an exam point of view. So, in this part, we will be starting with an understanding of what is socialization. We'll look at the modes of socialization, the agents of socialization, the various types of socialization. We will also look at the influence of socialization on children. And we'll touch upon socialization through play. And we will also briefly talk about Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. At the end, we will also solve 5 sample questions from various previous question papers. So let us start with what is socialization. So, socialization is what is called samajikaran in Hindi. Now, if we go by the definition of socialization, it says that socialization is the process by which a human being, beginning at infancy, acquires the habits, the norms, beliefs, culture, and knowledge of the society through interaction, education, and training. Now, if I were to explain it in a more simple way, socialization is the process through which a child learns how to talk, how to behave, what is right and what is wrong. And how does he learn this? He or she learns it through social interactions and through education and through training. So, socialization is a continuous process. That is, socialization never stops. It starts at infancy and it continues throughout the person's life. Now, I have put an asterisk on education and training because I just wanted to touch upon what is the difference between these two terms. Education is where you learn theory and training is where you learn the practical aspect of something. You learn some skills. For example, when I go to school, I get education. When I go to a computer training class, I get training. Therefore, that is the difference between these two terms, which are quite often used interchangeably. So, to summarize this slide, socialization is nothing but the process through which the child learns the basic social skills on how to behave when there are people around him or her. Next, let us look at the modes of socialization. This is very important because very often we get questions around these various modes of interaction, which is formal, which is informal. So, socialization can happen through formal modes or informal modes. Formal modes are school, training, education. So, these are modes where there is a specific syllabus and you know what is it that you are going to teach the child. So, there is a structure or there is a format for this type of socialization, whereas informal socialization is unplanned and ad hoc, and it happens when the child is interacting with his or her family, friends, and is watching some media, maybe TV, internet. So, informal socialization does not have a proper structure or a syllabus or a format. It can happen through any of these means. Therefore, formal and informal are the two modes of socialization. Next, let us look at the agents of socialization. That is, where all can socialization happen? Well, it can happen in the family, when the child is interacting with people from his immediate family or the extended family. It can happen when the child is interacting with his or her peers. Then it can happen at school. Now, at school, it can both be formal and informal because the child will be studying something in school and the child will also be playing at school. So it can be formal and informal at school. Then it can be when the child is watching something on a mass media. It can happen through interactions with the community or with the neighborhood. It can happen through the religious beliefs or the religious practices that the child is following. It can happen through various sports that the child is playing, or at a later stage in life, it can also happen at workplace or at the office where the person is spending a lot of time. So these are the different agents of socialization for any person. Next, let us look at the various types of socialization. There are 5 main types of socialization, which are primary, secondary, developmental, anticipatory, and resocialization. Now, from your exam point of view, primary socialization and secondary socialization are very, very important because very frequently we see questions asking us to identify which are primary or secondary types of socialization. Now, primary socialization normally happens at home, and this happens through parents or the family. So this is the first type of socialization that happens to any child. And secondary socialization normally happens outside the house. That is, it can happen at school, it can happen when the child is interacting with his or her peers, and it can happen when the child is watching some media, or that is, the child is watching some TV or watching something on YouTube or reading something on the internet. So secondary socialization normally happens through sources outside the house. Now, I have highlighted media here specifically because in some research papers, it is said that media is also a primary source of socialization because the child is normally exposed to media at home. But from your syllabus perspective, media is under secondary socialization. So remember, primary socialization normally happens at home from parents and family, and secondary socialization is because of sources outside the house, that is school, peers and media. The other three types of socialization are not so important from your syllabus perspective. However, we should still know about them. Now, developmental socialization is where you are learning a formal skill or a definite type of skill because you are expecting some situation, some social situation that will require the use of such skills. For example, if I have to give a public speech, then I might enroll in English speaking classes because I want to be comfortable in speaking English. I might enroll in public speaking classes because I want to be comfortable in talking to a wider audience. Therefore, this is developmental socialization where I'm learning a specific social skill in a formal environment. Next is anticipatory socialization. Anticipatory socialization is where a person is practicing or rehearsing a behavior for a future relationship or a future social situation, and this is informal in nature. For example, when I am going to join a new office, right, or I'm going to meet some new people, so I might stand in front of the mirror and rehearse. How am I going to introduce myself to them? How am I going to interact with them? How am I going to stand? So if I am practicing something informally, some type of behavior, in the anticipation of some future social situation or a future social relationship, that is anticipatory socialization because you are anticipating or expecting something. And the last one is re-socialization. Now, re-socialization happens when you have learnt some type of social skills through any other modes, and you have to forget or you have to outgrow those particular behaviors and learn some new behaviors because you are going to a different place. For example, if a person is in India, right? Normally, if I have to drop into my friend's house, I don't need to be so formal. I just drop into his place, I go, I open the door, I ask him, chalo chalte hain, let's go out. Right? So that's the type of social interaction or social behavior that might be acceptable in India. But if a person goes to US or to a different country, maybe Singapore, right? There, if you have to even drop into your friend's house, or in some cases, even when you are dropping into your parents' house, right? You are expected to call or communicate with the people earlier and make sure that they are available at home and make sure that they are okay to receive guests, and only then you can drop into their house, and you cannot drop into anybody's house unannounced or without prior notice. So that is the kind of behavior that is acceptable in that country, whereas in India it might be a lot less formal. Therefore, an Indian who's relocating to any of this country might need to reject the previous behavior patterns and learn some new patterns. So that is re-socialization. Just to reiterate, primary and secondary socialization are very, very important. So these are the two types of socialization that you should be thoroughly familiar with. You will definitely see at least one question based on these, and the others you can ignore. Next, let us look at the influence of socialization. That is, how does socialization affect the behavior of a child? Well, first it can be through imitation, because if the child is socially interacting with a particular group, then the child might start imitating somebody in that group. Right? It might be in the way the child speaks or the way the child dresses. So the child is actually changing his or her behavior because of imitating somebody in that social group. Then it can be by identification. For example, if the child is part of a religious group, right? If the child is regularly participating in some religious ritual, then the child will start identifying himself or herself as part of that religious community, and because of that the child will learn to behave in a particular way. So that is change of behavior because of identification, right? And then it can be through suggestion as well, because if somebody in that social group is suggesting to the child to behave in a particular way and the child changes his or her behavior accordingly, then that is change in behavior due to suggestion. And the child might actually be sympathetic towards somebody in that social group. For example, if the child is interacting with other children who are from an economically weaker background and they don't have access to the same kind of facilities or the same kind of pocket money that this child has, so the child might behave in a sympathetic manner where the child might learn how to share things with others, and the child might feel empathy towards somebody who's going through a difficult situation, and that might change this child's behavior. And you can also see that children acquire language through socialization. That is, if a child is playing with a particular group, then very soon you will see this child speaking the same type of language, using the same kind of slangs, and if that group is using bad words, this child also will learn to use the same kind of bad words. So that is how children can also acquire language through socialization. So these are the different ways in which socialization can affect the behavior of a child. Play is very, very important for the development of a child, and socialization can happen a lot through play as well. To understand socialization through play, we can look at Mildred Patton's 6 stages of play. Now, we can see that socialization mainly happens in the last 4 stages of play. To start with, the first type of play that the child will engage in is something called unoccupied play. That is, the child is not playing as much as just trying to understand how he or she can control his or her own body. That is, the child is interacting with some blocks, interacting with some toys, and just trying to figure out how can I hold this toy? How can I throw this toy? How can I squeeze this toy? Can I place one on top of the other? So the child is learning to control his or her own body. Next comes solitary play, where the child is playing with the toys, but the child is oblivious or is ignoring everything around him or her. The child is just playing with those toys. Next comes onlooker play, where the child will start looking at others who are playing with similar kind of toys, and they are trying to imitate, or they are trying to understand how the other children are playing, right? So this is onlooker. In some cases they might try to imitate, in some cases they are just looking at the other children who are playing and trying to understand what is happening. So this is the first stage of socialization in play. Next is parallel play. That is, the child is looking at other children playing and trying to imitate them or trying to play in the same way. So the child is still playing on with himself or herself. The child is not interacting with other children, but his play is being influenced by others. The child is observing the others and trying to imitate. Next is associative play, where the child starts interacting a little more with the other children. The child is still playing by himself or herself, but the child is also interacting with others, speaking to others, asking for some toys, giving some toys. So some level of social interaction is happening, right? But the main play is still happening individually. And next comes cooperative play. So cooperative play is where the children are not just playing by themselves, they are actually playing together. That is, they are part of the same game. So it might be that one child becomes a police and one child becomes a thief, or one child becomes a doctor and the other child becomes a patient. So they are part of the same game. So that is cooperative play. So in this way, in the last 4 stages, that is when they start looking at other children and trying to understand what is happening, then when they start playing in parallel and trying to imitate other children, and when they start interacting socially with other children that they are playing with, and finally when they start playing together. So these are the 4 stages of play where socialization can happen. So this is socialization through play. Talking about the concept of socialization, Erikson's 8-step theory of psychosocial development is also one of the important theories in this field. However, this is not so important from your exam perspective because very few questions, or if at all, will go into the depth of this theory. All you should be aware of is that Erikson is a German-American developmental psychologist and psychoanalyst, and he developed the 8-step theory of psychosocial development. He's also well known for the fact that he coined the phrase identity crisis, which is very frequently used these days. This is the table that is depicting Erik Erikson's 8-stage theory of psychosocial development. You don't have to worry much about this theory, as I have mentioned, because very rarely will you see any questions going into the depth of this theory. But just to be on the safer side, we'll just have a brief overview of what this theory is all about. So Erik Erikson says that a person normally will go through 8 stages of psychosocial development, and these 8 stages are divided as per the age that the person goes through. For example, in stage 1, when the child is just between 0 to 1 years, this is infancy, then the question that the child is trying to answer is, can I trust this world? That is, the conflict in the child's mind is between trust and mistrust. So a very young child will start identifying his or her mother and says that this lady who is feeding me is safe. The child will get used to being held by the father and starts to trust the father and decides that this person is safe because he holds me and he comforts me, he plays with me. Right? So the child has identified the people who are safe and who can be trusted, and everybody else should not be trusted. So if you pick up a very young child, the child will start crying, because if a stranger picks up the child immediately notices that this is not my mother, this is not my father, so this person cannot be trusted. So the child starts crying. And as soon as the mother or the father pick up the child might stop crying. So that is because the child is trying to answer whether I can trust this person or no. So that is the age when can I trust the world is the question in the person's mind. Next is early childhood. In early childhood, the child is trying to control his or her own body. Right? The child has learned to walk. The child is learning to control his or her own potty and urination, because the child might be wearing a diaper at some times and might not be wearing a diaper at some times. And the child starts to notice that if he or she urinates or defecates anywhere, then the people around him or her might be angry and they might say, "Chi chi chi, what did you do?" So the child starts to learn between autonomy and shame. And the child is trying to answer, can I control my own behavior? And bodily functions, control of bodily functions is also part of controlling this behavior. So this is the stage when the child is trying to get control over his or her own body. Next comes play age. In play age, the child is becoming more independent, and the child is walking around playing with the things around him or her. And the child is trying to answer, how independent can I be? That is, the child will go and try to play with something, but the moment the child will get a little afraid, the child will run back towards his or her parents. So the child is trying to experiment between how confident am I or how confident can I be, and the child is trying to overcome the guilt or the doubt factor. Right? The child is trying to become more independent. Next comes school age. In school age, the child is already growing up, and the child has been exposed to a lot of socialization, and the child is also has the understanding that many of the things that are being taught in school are very important from a future perspective. So the child is trying to understand, can I understand whatever is being taught? Can I learn whatever is being taught? Because these are necessary for future, right? And the child is trying to understand, can I master these skills? Next comes adolescence. In adolescence, this is where the identity crisis part comes in, because the adolescent is trying to understand, what is my part in this world? Where do I fit in? Right? So who am I? What are my beliefs, feelings, attitudes? So these are the questions that the adolescent is trying to answer. So these are also the teenage years. So typically you see that there is the teen years or the teenage years when people go through, or children go through, a lot of psychological adjustment. So that is because they are trying to answer these questions. Next comes early adulthood. In early adulthood, the people are already sexually mature and they are looking at intimate relationships. And the question that they are trying to answer here is, can I fully give myself to another person? That is, they are experimenting with the concept of love. They are experimenting with the concept of trust and seeing that whether they can fully give themselves to another person, fully trust another person. So this is the stage in which people fall in love, fall out of love, right? And then comes mature adulthood. Here, the person is already in a proper job, and the person probably already has a family, and the person is looking at what can I offer to the succeeding generation, because the person is trying to build a future for his or her children. And the question is, what can I do for the next generation? Then the last stage is old age, wherein the person is already reaching the end of his or her life, and the question that is in his or her mind is, what have I achieved throughout my life? Am I content with whatever I have done? Should I have done something else? So the stage where the person will be contented with his or her life or feel a sense of regret. So this is the last stage. So these are the 8 stages of psychosocial development that Erikson says that almost every person will go through. So as I mentioned, don't worry too much about this theory. You can pause the video here and go through the table, read through each of these. It is a fairly simple theory, but you won't see too many questions going into the depth of this. Next, let us solve a few questions from previous question paper on the topic of socialization. The first question is, peer groups are the agent of which of the following? Now, if you remember, in one of the previous slides, we discussed about the various types of socialization, and the 2 important types of socialization that I mentioned were primary and secondary. And primary socialization is where it happens at home, and the main sources of primary socialization are parents and family. And secondary socialization happens outside the home, which is where the child starts to interact with peers, with his or her classmates in school, and the media as well. Therefore, here we are being asked, peer groups are the agent of which type of socialization? So peer groups comes under secondary socialization, that is peers. Therefore, the correct answer is option 1, that is secondary socialization. Which of the following are the major socialization agencies? Community is definitely a major socialization agency. Family is also a major socialization agency. Same group, that is peers, is also important because peers come under secondary socialization. And formal educational institution, that is school, is also important because school is also an agent of secondary socialization. Therefore, all of these are agencies of socialization. Therefore, the correct answer here is option 2, that is 1, 2, 3 and 4. Which would be the best first theme to start with in a nursery class? Now, when we are talking about nursery class children, look at the type of socialization that these children would have had. Now, these are very young children who have just gone through the first stage of primary socialization. That is, their socialization has happened with their own parents and their own family. Therefore, the best theme to start with in nursery class would be my family, because their socialization, their primary socialization has already happened. They have still not been in school for long enough to have a best friend probably. So socialization with friends has not happened yet. They still have not interacted with too many people in the neighborhood. So socialization in the neighborhood has not happened yet. And my school, this is a secondary socialization which is also still at the beginning stages. Therefore, this is also a theme which should come later and not as a first theme. Therefore, the best first theme has to be my family. What do you mean by secondary socialization? Now we have been given 4 statements here. So let's look at all the 4 statements in detail. The last one says it refers to the process by which men learn the culture of a group with anticipation of joining a group. Now this is anticipatory socialization. So this is not secondary socialization. So eliminate this. Next, it refers to socialization of the infant in the primary or early years of his life. So infant in the primary or earliest years. So we are talking about primary socialization here, not secondary. Therefore, this also eliminate. Next, it refers to the process of discarding former behavior patterns and accepting new ones. This is resocialization. Therefore, this also cannot be the answer. The first one says it refers to the growing child who learns very important lesson in social conduct from his peers. So peers and school and community, all these are agents of secondary socialization. Therefore, the correct answer is option 1. The process by which children develop habits, skills, values and motives which makes them responsible, productive members of the society is called which of the following? Now, what we are talking about here is one of the definitions of socialization. Right? It is not inclusion, it is not mainstreaming, and it is not differentiation. So the correct answer, whereby the process by which children develop all the habits and the skills and the values and the motives that they require to function in a particular society, to live in a particular society. This is nothing but socialization. And with that, we come to the end of this part. If you have any questions or feedback, please put them in the comment section below. And the rest, you know what to do. So I will see you again in the next part of this series. Till then, stay safe, take care.